going to seem like we're covering a lot. Some of this stuff, whenever you cover so much on certain sections, you don't need to cover quite as much when you get to other places. Let me know when we're recording and I'll get started here. Some of you know, but boy, running that crow's nest, you need to have about 8 arms.
Well, I started and then went on about something else.
Well, you can't. Are we recording? We're streaming there? Okay, well that's what I needed to know. All right, Revelation chapter 13, verse 3. It says, "And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast." Let's go ahead and go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Lord God, thank you for this evening. Lord, the folks that are able to be here tonight, Lord, I pray that you'd bless them, God, from your book. And Lord, help us to discern these things. These things are praying in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, so one of the heads of the beast is cut off and it's wounded. And we talked a little bit about this, last time I think it is. In terms of it, you can definitely look at it as it's literally the Antichrist is wounded, but in a general sense, that's kind of the way the Bible is that it'll have double applications and sometimes even triple applications. So even though it can apply to a person individually, it can also apply to one of the kingdoms individually. So it could be Nimrod, king of Babel. Now obviously not literally Nimrod, right? Nimrod's long gone, but the kingdom that represents Babel. All right, could be Pharaoh, king of Egypt, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Cyrus, king of Persia, Alexander, king of Greece, or Caesar, king of Rome. And one of these heads is wounded to death, and the deadly wound was healed. And one of those nations that was cut off is going to revive, and it's going to end up taking over. And I say that's the same is true for the Antichrist himself. All right. Let's see. So from there, let's look at, we're here in verse 3. We keep going here. Let's see. I think where we were predominantly last time was we were looking at folks in the Bible that have deadly head wounds and how they picture the Antichrist. And that's where we got off on some real interesting territory with the sons of God in Genesis 6 and, how all that ties together with mythology, quote unquote, with stuff like Atlantis and Mount Olympus and Asgard and all of that kind of stuff and where that fits in history and where it fits in biblical history and all of those types of different things. So we talked about Goliath, and that's whenever David asked about Goliath and got off on that a little bit. But in 1 Samuel, let's see, what is it? I believe it's 17, isn't it? 1 Samuel 17. Not only is Goliath hit in the head with that stone from David, but that's not where his head wound ends, because you got somewhere between a 9 and 13-foot giant roaming around. You probably don't want to just trust the fact that he's down for the count because you hit him in the head with a rock. And so whenever David gets over there, he takes Goliath's sword out of his sheath, or picks up his sword, either way, but he gets a hold of Goliath's sword. I don't know what kind of, how big a sword, probably a 13-foot, somewhere between a 9 and 13-foot giant, what kind of sword that guy carries. But little old David, I don't know, that thing had to be kind of dragging around the ground, but he gets that thing up and I don't know, maybe just drops it on his neck, but he ends up cutting Goliath's head off. So that's the completion of Goliath's deadly head wound. All right. Let's see. And you've got others throughout the Bible that represent this. Let's see. One of them would be Absalom. Absalom, if you remember Absalom, I believe that's, if I can find the spot over here, it should be, I believe 2 Samuel. Let's see, 2 Samuel, let's see, hopefully chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. May not be. Okay, yeah, here we go. All right, 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 6 and 7, it says, they came hither into the midst of the house as though they would have fetched wheat, and they smote him under the 5th rib, and Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped, for they came into the house. He lay on his bed in his bedchamber, and they smote him and slew him and beheaded him and took his head and gat him away through the plain all night. Okay, well that's not Absalom.
Absalom, he just got darted to death.
Yeah, but what led to him getting darted to death? He got his hair stuck in a tree. So, if you want to count that, maybe, but what we just read there was Abner. When Saul's son heard that Abner was dead in Hebron, okay, we'll keep going on here. His hands were feeble, and Saul's son had 2 men that were captains of bands. The name of the one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, the sons of Rimmon. Beeroth of the children of Benjamin, for Beeroth also was reckoned to Benjamin, and the Beerothites fled to Gideon and were sojourners until that day. And Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son that was lame of his feet. He was 5 years old when the tidings came of Saul and Jonathan of Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled, and it came to pass as she made haste, and she fell. Now this is Mephibosheth, and the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite went and came about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth to lay on a bed around noon. All right, so... And they came thither to the midst of the house as though they would have fetched wheat, and they smote him under the 5th rib, and Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. Let's see if I got... What's that? Verse 7, when they came to the house to lay hands on the bedchamber, they smote him and slew him and beheaded him. I'm trying to... what I'm looking for there... Okay, it's Ishbosheth. I'm trying to get you the name of the guy that had the head wound. It says, and they brought the head of Ishbosheth unto David to Hebron, and said unto the king, behold, the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, thine enemy. But you go on down through it, you can just mark every time you see somebody that gets a head wound, and they picture predominantly a type of Antichrist. All right? Go ahead. No? All right. All right, next slide.
Maybe. If anybody wanted to reference Absalom getting his hair stuck in the oak, is 2 Samuel 18:14.
2 Samuel 18:14, thank you. 2 Samuel 18:14, it says, and then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts of his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. All right, so there's our list there of our biblical head wounds. Okay, so let's see, that was 2 Samuel. We got 2 Samuel 17:49 while we're... Well, that must be a wrong reference.
Yeah, close to 18:9.
18:9. So yeah, sometimes my references get off a little bit. Oh, and that's 1 Samuel, okay. So let's see, let's go back. Well, 1 Samuel 17:49, that's going to be Goliath. Okay, 1 Samuel 31:9. We'll get them while we're here. First Samuel 31:9. They cut off his head and stripped off his armor and sent him into the land of the Philistines, round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. That's Saul. Saul is killed there, and of course, if you're familiar with much on Saul, Saul makes a pretty good type of Antichrist, especially when you look at Psalms 22 and see that David's a type of Christ. Okay? All right, 2 Samuel 20:22. Says, then the women went out, all the people in their wisdom, and they cut off the head of Sheba, the son of Bichri, and cast it out to Joab, and he blew a trumpet, and they retired from the city, every man to his tent, and Joab returned to Jerusalem unto the king. All right, so you've got Sheba there. 2 Samuel 18:9 we just saw, and 2 Samuel 4, 6, and 7 we've already looked at with Ishbosheth. So there's several there that you'll find that incur a deadly head wound. That's in addition to the ones we looked at last time. We looked at Judas. Judas, whenever he falls out of that tree, he lands on his head. Of course, you could count him hanging himself in a tree as probably a fairly good neck wound. That neck is associated with the head the same way the wrist is associated with the hand. All right, any questions on any of that? Okay. All right, next slide here, we'll start Revelation chapter 13, verse 4. It says, "And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" So when this Antichrist really gets rolling, it's a complete domination thing where the average person says, there's no sense resisting. You can't make war with him. You'll lose. And so the Antichrist has such a dominant force, and his command is so, as far as the world is concerned, so utter and complete that that's the typical response. Now, that's really not that hard to imagine whenever you just look at the world that we live in today, because the average person today, admittedly, will do whatever they're told. And, granted, we probably all listen to different things, but there's been people, whether it's YouTubers or those types of different things that basically came out in the midst of every, a lot of the pandemic things, and I'm not trying to make a statement here one way or the other, but basically there's guys that are getting on there and say, well, listen, just shut up and do whatever they tell you to do. That's kind of the response. And so, by the time you get all the Christians out of the mix, you're going to be left with a pretty strong population that's willing to just go along with whatever they're told to do.
Chris, off the wall, that mark of the beast, that's all correct. It wasn't mark of the beast, but we went to the race and everything up there. If you wanted to buy something, it was all debit. There was no cash. So it's going to be simple, for this guy to do this thing. We was up there with, 2,000 or 3,000 people. There was not $1 bill taken out of nobody's pocket. You swiped the card, or you didn't get a bottle of water in.
Well, the funny thing is you talking about going someplace where there's no cash, right? It's all debit card. You go to most places anymore, they've gotten rid of all the checks, all the checkbooks. I remember this was years ago. There was commercials. Whenever debit cards started to come out, and they had this commercial, and everybody's just, almost dancing through this store, and everybody's just swiping their card and just moving along, and almost like a musical. Everything just moved flawlessly. People with their items and just scanned and out the door, and then somebody tries to pay with cash, and everybody's just bumping into each other because it's this big mess, trying to get change and all this other stuff. And I was like, and so there was a lot of idea that, maybe these debit cards, that's the mark of the beast, and now they've got a chip in them, so, that's it right there. No, it's always one thing, and then it moves you a little closer, and then a little closer, and a little closer, and a little closer. Back in whatever it was, maybe it was 1950s or whenever, the very first item to ever come out with a barcode was Wrigley Spearmint Gum. And this is still true to this day, that each one of those bars has a number designation, and as far as I know, the first, middle, and last bar are always the same no matter what you buy. And that first, middle, and last bar are always 6. Now, if you look through and you say, man, that's not right, and let me show you here, okay, fine, but that's just, it's one of those things. And so for a long time, people assumed, well, the mark of the beast then must be a barcode that's tattooed on your forehead and on your hand. And so in all your new Bible versions, they changed the scripture reference to the mark of the beast to being on the hand and on the forehead. But your King James Bible always had in the hand and in the forehead. So that can't possibly be right. It must be a barcode, right? And this is interestingly enough, in Hebrew and in Greek, letters all have number designations. And so, like the letter W, for instance, has a number designation in Hebrew. Do you know what it is? Well, it's 6. So, since the advent of the internet, what has every single web address ever started with? www dot, and it may have http backslash, colon backslash, but they all have in there www or 666. And it is interesting when you start looking at the internet, it's called the World Wide Web. It's the internet. I don't know. I just, the more you get into this book, you can't assume that there's coincidence in anything, that it's all purposeful. So, in fact, I was watching this documentary on the people that did all these they were basically startups at the time, but they've turned into things like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all these different things. Well, they did a documentary, I think it was called The Social, I forget, it was The Social Experiment or something like that. But they interviewed these people and they said basically the people behind developing these programs, their chief thing was to, through psychological means, keep you on it. Just keep you on it for as long as they possibly can. And so they've done that with like colors, their color choices. One deal that I read said that the animations and the color choices on a game like Candy Crush. I don't know if you're familiar with Candy Crush, right? But they said what goes on the brain, in the brain of somebody who plays Candy Crush hits the same nerve receptors, and it causes the same level of dopamine as somebody who's on cocaine. That's why people but how did they get there? Well, they got there through, it was purposeful. Why? To keep you on it. So you look around and you go to a family get-together or whatever, and the first thing you'll see a dozen people in a room and everybody's looking at their phone. Why? Because they're addicted. It's a drug. Listen, I'm not pulling myself out of that mix. There's a lot of things that I'll forget on my way to school to go to work, but my phone's not one of them. That's just how it is. But why is it? Because it's a net, and it's a web, and it's meant to catch you, and it's meant to keep you.
I was listening to Brother Peacock at camp. He was explaining to the young people. He says, I just want to let you know something I've noticed amongst you as I'm speaking to you. He says, talk about TikTok. He says it's about a 10-second video or a 30-second video. He says, I'm watching you, or you're watching me for about 30 seconds. Or your attention span that you're not handling. You may program to drop whatever's being presented.
And here's the data on TikTok, right? Now, it has options for like load times or the length of video that you can put on there. And I think it's 30 seconds, a minute, and 3 minutes. 3 minutes is the longest video you can put on there. But you know what their data shows? Their data shows that if you're going to put a video on there and you want it to get a lot of views, if you want it to go viral, the average viral video on TikTok is 7 seconds or less. The average person won't watch most people on TikTok won't watch something that lasts longer than 7 seconds. So whenever I first started in the ministry, the prevailing thought was you don't want to really probably preach longer than 45 minutes because at the time, keep in mind, this was before maybe say a streaming service. Well, your average TV program is 45 minutes. The attention span had dropped to 45 minutes. And then out comes YouTube. And it drops down to 10 minutes. Most people won't watch at that time, wouldn't watch a YouTube video longer than 10 minutes. And then TikTok comes out and drops it from 10 minutes to 7 seconds. That's how short that span gets. And it's meant to just keep you on it, keep you engaged, keep you engaged. You're in a net. You're in a web. I know that's, whatever, but so we'll look at this here for a second, though. The Greek word for worshipped is proskuneo. You can spell it Proskuneo, and it is the word for kiss. Okay, so your Greek word for worship is the same word as the word for kiss. And they kissed him exactly as it was called your attention in Revelation 9:20. They kiss or they worship the devil. There again is your XXX, because if you're around during Valentine's Day, what do you have? You've got X's and O's. Now, I always had it wrong. I thought that the X's were the arms, hugs, and the kisses was the mouth. I looked it up. I was wrong. The kisses are the X's. The hugs are the O's. And so, kiss, kiss, kiss is XXX. Romans chapter 11, verse 4. This is on the next slide here. Romans chapter 11, verse 4. Should be with our next slide. Okay. Romans 11:4 says, But what saith the answer of God unto him? I have reserved to myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to the image of Baal. Hopefully I got the right reference there. Got it. Back in the Old Testament, the men who did not worship Baal didn't kiss him. Right? Didn't worship. 1 Kings 19:18. Now 18 is 6 plus 6 plus 6. It says, Yet have I left me 7,000 men, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which hath not. Notice this. What does it say there in 1 Kings 19:18? Does it say, bowed the knee to the image of Baal? What does it say? In one place, okay, who have not bowed the knee to the image of Baal. But if you'll notice in 1 Kings 19:18, it gives you another detail. It says, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and in a comma gives you more information. What does it tell you after the comma? And every mouth which hath not kissed him. Okay? Luke 22:48. But Jesus said unto him, Judas, betrayest thou the Son of Man with a kiss? All right? So that's the kind of worship that goes on in the tribulation. Now we'll see in our next slide here, we'll get into our next set of verses, which is Revelation chapter 13, verses 5 through 11. So obviously we'll be in this for a little while here, but we'll read this and keep going. Revelation chapter 13, verse 5. It says, And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints, and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds, and tongues, and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life, of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. If any man have an ear to hear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb. He spake as a dragon. Now you notice something in there kind of keeps showing up again. He speaks, he speaks, he speaks. This man is a false prophet. As Judas is resurrected as the Antichrist, this man is a resurrected false prophet, perhaps even Balaam himself. But he's a wolf in John chapter 10, and he's typified in Deuteronomy 18:21. Let's get our next slide, Deuteronomy 18:21. Deuteronomy 18:21 and 22, at the end of that chapter, it says, And if thou say in thine heart, How shall we know the word which the Lord hath not spoken? When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken, but the prophet hath spoken it presumptuously, thou shalt not be afraid of him. All right, but that's how a false prophet. That's what a false prophet does. Is a false prophet speaks. And the Antichrist is a false prophet. And there's going to be a false prophet during the time of tribulation. It's kind of interesting to me, just as we see how things are going in the world that we are today. That's probably one of the biggest concerns out there right now is misinformation. In fact, that's what you're finding is kind of the root of a lot of different things is fake news, false information, even to the point of where we are with artificial intelligence. That's the problem they have with artificial intelligence right now, is that artificial intelligence is getting to the point where they can't distinguish it from people. And artificial intelligence is even to the point where it's producing art. Well, the person didn't produce that art. And so they're finding artificial intelligence is doing things and putting things out there that are false and fake, and people are behind it. The world that you're in right now is a precursor for the world to come. It's not going to be the world that you're in right now, but the world that you're in right now is the progenitor of what comes next. So imagine where we are right now, and now continue to take that to the next logical conclusion, and you'll start seeing where these things show up in the tribulation and in your Bible. All right? Let's see. So as far as looking at this, look at 2 Thessalonians 2:4. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. So you've got to be careful of all things what you listen to. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. All right, 2 Thessalonians 2:4, this is the Antichrist. Notice this, it says, who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. He's going to speak to the whole world, and he's going to claim to be God. Now, whenever I was growing up, as a kid, we would watch ABC News. I think that's all we had. We had the one channel on television, and I remember the anchor at the time was Peter Jennings. Anybody in here remember Peter Jennings? You know, and there was Desert Storm was going on, and so, Peter Jennings would get on the line with, some, reporter in the field, and Peter Jennings would ask the man some questions. You remember how awkward those conversations were? Peter Jennings asks a question, and like 5 seconds later, the guy's able to hear the question and then answer the question, and they're all the time, do I still have you? Do I still got you there? And then by the time Peter Jennings is asking him if he heard the question, the guys begin to answer the question, and it's just confusion because of the span of distance between what somebody is saying and what they're hearing and getting all that back. But you hardly ever see a problem like that today. In fact, what they're working with today is something called latency, low latency satellite technology. And that's the idea behind what right now is SpaceX. SpaceX is putting satellites up in something called Starlink. And the latency is supposed to be so low, and the technology that they're working with is supposed to be so fast that, that they've been able to put these VR goggles on soccer players. Now, with like 4G technology, with all their eyes covered and only being able to see what is wirelessly transmitted to them, with 4G technology, one of them could kick the ball, but by the time that the signal had gotten to the player of what was going on, if he tried to kick the ball back, he'd miss it. It had already gone by him. With 5G technology, there was 5 or 6 of these soccer players, all with VR goggles on. Nobody could see anything, but because of the cameras and everything that was set up in the goggles, they could have a soccer game even though nobody could see with their own eyes. That's 5G. Now, I'm just curious, because I don't think that there's a coincidence about anything. I don't think that 5G will be what they have during the tribulation. I think that there's something that makes a lot more sense for them to have. What do you think it would be? 6G. That's just my hypothesis, and I think that whenever the Antichrist sits on that throne and proclaims himself to be God, that is going to be such a thing that as the words are coming out of his mouth, everybody on earth, through the technology that exists, will hear it just like they were in the room with him. That's how fast all of this stuff is moving.
That's Beelzebub and a lot of the flies. Be careful what you tell in the chambers, because the little flies will.
The little birdie told me.
The little birds.
And isn't that the idea behind Twitter? Why make your logo a bird and call them tweets? Why? Because a little birdie told me. It's just there's a spirit behind all of it, and it all kind of leads up. In fact, yeah, you get over into how devils, I guess, personify themselves, is that they're personified as birds. In fact, you're given a whole list of birds you're not to eat, and the devils are likened into birds. And if we're looking at Revelation 13:6, going back here, but Satan desecrates the tribulation, the tabernacle that exists. And so watch what you say about the brethren. Accusing them is the work of the devil. So let's see if I get over there, back over to Revelation 13:6. So you look at what the devil does there in 13:6. It says, and he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. So just as a point here, not necessarily a dispensational point, but just you look at what the devil does, right? What is something that the devil does during the tribulation? He blasphemes God's people. So just as a rule then, probably not a good idea for you to be involved in blaspheming God's people, right? Talking bad about the brethren, living or dead, because you'll see whose company you're keeping whenever you get involved in that stuff and just tearing down the brethren. You may not get along with all the brethren, but if you can't get along, there was one little rabbit I saw one time that said, keep your mouth shut. Right? Because better keep your mouth shut than be in company with the devil. Revelation 13:7. All right, it says, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints and overcome them, and power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. So tribulation saints on the earth are in a one world setup. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now with this, with just one world kind of propaganda. I even saw it, I think I mentioned it before, I was getting on a flight, on an American Airlines flight, and there was a sticker. You know how you get on one of those planes and the gate kind of goes right up to the door, but you can see the plane around the door? And it had a big sticker on there that said, one world. I don't know, just stuff like that sticks out to me. Just everywhere where you see all this idea of one world, one world, one world, there is a spirit behind that. And if you don't believe me, all you have to do is look back in the book of Genesis, well before the flood, right? What was the idea behind the Tower of Babel? Get everybody together, right? What did the Lord tell them to do? He said, go, spread out. Right? So this may seem like an odd thing to say, but the Lord is not interested in getting everybody together under their own authority. Now, the Lord is interested in getting everybody together under His authority, but mankind under His own authority is better divided up than he is together. And so what did the Lord do? The Lord divided them up. He confused the languages and spread them out. That's what the Lord's interested in. The Lord will, and listen, even now that you're saved, haven't you found that sometimes the Lord will separate you? Like, I found that. What is the Lord doing? Well, it seems like the Lord will separate you before He starts working with you. The Lord will get you alone.
Put all them people in the stadium 3 days down there when it flooded, and they couldn't live 3 days, they were raping.
Oh, was that down there, what, in New Orleans, when you're talking Katrina? Yeah.
Katrina during the flood.
Yeah. You get to put a whole bunch of people in a place like that. So you wonder how many people were murdered in that place. All right. Verse 8, and it says, all that dwell upon the earth shall worship Him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. So the result of getting everyone together is that everyone will worship the devil. That's what happens when you get everybody together. The byproduct is everybody will start worshiping the devil. You say, are they, going to be bowing down to, a statue of a half man, half goat? Well, they probably won't start off that way.
Look at where your morality falls quickest, it'll be in your bigger city.
Yeah.
Compared to a rural area, it goes quicker.
It does. It goes quicker, and it goes quicker for a lot of different reasons, but all those reasons have the same effect in terms of your cities tend to be more morally corrupt. You could name probably a number of different reasons besides just a lot of people being there. I would say that you could probably look at, in almost every major city, there's going to be at least one major university, right? And I mean, listen, I'm in education, so I always feel kind of hypocritical whenever I get into some of this stuff, but listen, if you're the devil, where do you want to be? I mean, you want to start them young, man. You want to get them messed up as young as humanly possible. And you'll see that with moral, corrupt ideology, even as it exists right now. You know, you've got just some of the worst things you can imagine. They've got the drag queen story hour. Just all kinds of horribleness. Why? Because I think it was Twitter. Twitter just came out with a policy stating that it is against their policy for anybody to use the phrase groomer because it's derogatory towards the LGBTQIA plus minus hashtag / degree symbol asterisk sign, whatever it is. Basically, the LGBTQ or whatever came out and said, we don't like people using the word groomer. What they did was they played their hand because they said they knew it's about them. Why? Because they don't have children. They have yours. They don't reproduce, they recruit. And you better believe they know where to recruit. And so education is a target for this type of stuff. I'm not saying that it, you know, in every place, in every teacher, in every classroom, and all of this type of thing, but be careful because that's where a lot of it will hit. Okay? It's amazing because it didn't start out that way. Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all of those major universities started out as places to train missionaries and pastors. I bet you couldn't find the gospel in one of those places with the James Webb telescope. But that's how it goes. Make no mistake, there is a spirit and an ideology behind these things. There is a force that moves this stuff, and it moves it in a specific direction to accomplish a specific end. That may sound conspiratorial to you, but if you read your Bible, it's not a conspiracy. We're talking about facts. Just because, what's that phrase? Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you. That's kind of how I feel about it. Oh, Pastor, you're just paranoid. Doesn't mean I'm wrong, right? Because if you can see it with the Bible and, hey, this is where these things wind up at, then you can draw the whole thing back and see the root cause and where it started off at. All right. Let's see.
Pastor, when you wrote about the Antichrist, and the passage of Scripture talks about how he doesn't not the desire of women, there in Daniel, and that kind of falls in with how things are going now, where it's more and more acceptable for someone. So is that like he is going to be?
So yeah, the statement or the verse that was brought up is in reference to the Antichrist. It says that he won't regard the love of women, I believe is the reference. I believe that's how it's worded. And if you find the reference, let me know and we'll read it. That at least seems to be a possible indicator that the Antichrist could possibly be, at the very least, not straight.
Daniel 11:37, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all.
All right, I'll go ahead and read that for the sake of anybody who might be watching. Daniel chapter 11, verse 37. Sorry to repeat, I just know that it says, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Okay, so there, and we've covered this before, is a reference for the fact that he will probably be, or will be, at least partially Jewish by nationality, by genealogy. Okay, the God of his fathers. Notice capital G on God of his fathers. So he's going to be a half-breed Hamitic Assyrian Jew. Nor the desire of women. So he's neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God. All right, so he's not going to elevate any lowercase g God, for he shall magnify himself above all. So at the very least, you could probably say that he's not going to be straight. He's not going to be in a relationship with a woman. He's not going to regard that. Has no desire for women. Of course, the easy application is to say, well, then if he has no desire for women, then he very likely has a desire for men. That's possible. I don't know if, with just what's there, if you can take it all the way there. The door is open for it. You kind of have to look at what's there and say, well, we know this. He has no desire for women. So he's not straight.
Even Paul said, "Be as I am," called there.
Right.
Is it something maybe for a priesthood or something where
it could be in the essence of like your popes are celibate. Keep in mind that when you're talking about the Antichrist here, you're talking about the devil, right? I mean, in terms of all of this stuff, he's got an agenda that's going to be bigger and more important to him than a relationship, right? Jesus Christ is about a relationship. The devil's not interested in a relationship. The devil's interested in worship. And so he's got a short time here. I would very likely say that there's just a good chance that he's got bigger fish to fry than messing around. He's not concerned with people. He's not concerned with any of that kind of thing. Is really the kind of the way that I read it, rather than to go so far to say that he's going to be gay. I don't know if you can go that far, if that makes sense. And you could probably use that to say that, granted, you've got an Antichrist and a false prophet. So I'd say that the false prophet's probably going to be the Pope. So I'd say that these two things kind of diverge. So whether or not he's part of a Catholic priesthood, I'm not saying that can't be. I don't know. There's good questions there, not necessarily ones that I can nail down. All right. Let's see. Coming back here to Revelation chapter 13, verse 9, it says, "If any man have an ear to hear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword shall be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints." So the Jews are going to get slaughtered. And it will be dying for faith and belief, not nations. They're going to die for their faith, not because they're the nation of Israel. Right? They're hunted right now, not because they're Jews necessarily, as much as because they're in a land somebody else wants and thinks is theirs. Now, in those Islamic nations, they're not killed so much because they're Jews as much as because they're not Muslims. The Muslims, if you were over there, would be just as happy to kill you being a Christian as they would a Jew for being a Jew, because you're not Muslim. All right, where are we at here? We'll probably stop there on time. I got just a little bit more left on verse 11 before we get into verses 12 through 14, but we'll hold it off for now. So, any other questions before I turn off?